Yo, what's up guys? Let's say you have a pretty good Lucian. But then the big question is like, okay, I have good Lucian stats right now. Attack is pretty high, crit damage is pretty high. But then what is the best artifacts to add in a lot of damages on this? Is it going to be additional damage from attack, like a high one on that? Is that going to be a high one on crit damage skill 3? Or is that going to be a high one on attack increasing effect? Well, in most cases, I can already give you a hint. Combination lines is the thing that makes it strongest. So we're gonna check for a few units how you can both calculate it, but also can kind of play around with seeing like, okay, what does kind of work, what does kind of not work. Because in swap, you can calculate these kind of stats. However, there's one that's kind of excluded in there, which is crit damage max. That one isn't really calculated that well in there. There is also something else, which is, for example, a damage calculator this way, which someone made way in the past. I'm not sure. Oh, it's Spoon Dagger made this like way back. You don't have this for every unit though. You could build this for every unit. It kind of does work. It does have everything in there with damage minus, all of the guild leads and all of that stuff. But how many fight runes? This is actually a pretty like intense one that makes it work. But this is only specific for Lucian. But let's put my numbers in. So these are the numbers that would be there with attack buff, how much this amputation magic would do at the moment. And then the big question is like, okay, from artifacts, how many fight runes, what kind of lead is in there and all of that kind of stuff. And you can kind of play around with like, okay, let's say that I would put everything to 0 and I'm just gonna check for, okay, what if I add in 6, so that's full rule on this. Okay, so we're gonna look at this number. So the 1736.7 over here. If we change that number right now, we go up by pretty much like 140-ish. Let's put a roll in here. Is that about same? No, that's actually more. That's actually a substantial amount more. No, wait, is it more? Okay, I'm gonna add a notepad in here, otherwise it is hard to check. So CD full line is... Wait, these actually roll 5s, they don't roll 6s. So these would be the numbers that I would get. So this is a base hit, and then for a full roll, so that is a 6 crit damage, I will gain this much extra damage per card. For a full attack roll, which is a max 5, I will get 286 damage per card, and for additional damage by attack, I will get just 180 per card. So this does mean that for the build that I currently have, which might be different on your numbers, maybe if you add more fight sets, then one might count more than the other. But I do kind of think that it still will be scaling something along this line. That additional damage by that attack increasing effect, if you always do have attack buff, that is like the if statement on that one. But if you do always have attack buff on your unit, then attack increasing effect probably is your strongest line out there that you want to give towards adding most damage in your artifact. What would that mean for my artifacts that I have right now? Well, this one is pretty straightforward. A lot of attack up over here. And this one is a lot of attack up, but if we look at more combination lines, we do see here that we have more combination lines with a crit damage first. Well, crit damage first will only work on the first card out of 3, and the other 2 won't work at all. Crit damage max will only work best for the first card, and then gradually gets less damage, and then the crit damage itself will work good on that statement. So you could be looking into like, okay, this is like a 2.5 extra roll, technically like 3.5 rolls on this. Do I maybe have something that has like 3 rolls in here and then maybe also something in here? So it's kind of like, what is the highest combination line that you have out there to find like, okay, what would do most damage? So I think the most damage that I can do on my Lucian will probably be these artifacts. So with this Lucian going in with the 20 over here and then the 17 over there with a little bit more on the other things, let's go in. Do keep in mind if you're like trial and erroring this kind of stuff, like, okay, what would be best? There is about a 5% damage up and down from like your average hit that you can do. So that could be a pretty big damage fluctuation anyways. So per card, we're doing like 20Ks and then we can see like the damage going down. So that's also the first hit that shows in here that does more, and then the crit damage down. This is just a higher damage fluctuation by than this one, or maybe it was already dead after that first card anyway. So that is how you can see that damage going in there. Now, you might not be really wanting to do this kind of stuff all the time of going in and out and testing. What would be the highest damage for each individual unit that you would like to do stuff of? The best recommendation that I can give you is use that in the Summoner's War Rune Optimizer. I have different videos how to catch your Jason, which you will need for the optimizer, different videos on how, like the tutorial and that kind of stuff, how it works. But let me just get to you, like, okay, if you just have the optimizer loaded in, how would that look like and how can you calculate right away what your highest damage artifact would be? So this would be the optimizer. I always like to check it from the optimized part. So we have the Lucian in here already. I can calculate the damage now from what it will do for the current set. Of course, you can also do like damage calculations, which set is actually best, but I do already know that the current set with the Rage Blade that is on it is the highest set out there. And then if we just want to do the artifacts, checking which artifacts would do most damage, you can use the equip runes only and only fill the empty slots. In this case, it will also show that it only has one build, which does mean like we're not calculating anything right now because we're saying for both, like we're not artifact checking, we're not rune checking. Then we would say like, okay, we do want to check all of the artifacts. In most cases for this, you do want to go attack main. And then for the damage, you would have to put in amputation magic, ignore defense. We are always using attack buff. You can put how many fight runes over there like before, but in general take, I kind of like to take it in here. So let's say we have 3 fight runes in the team. I would like to put it over here. And then we're going to say like, okay, what kind of build is it going to give me for artifacts? Wait, it's supposed to get me artifacts. Why is it not showing me artifacts? It is showing me artifacts. Okay, so in this case, that's a pretty interesting one that they would show me for the highest damage. These are not the ones that I actually used. Wait, it is allowed to use all artifacts, right? Yeah, so it does show different artifacts than I have, but that's also where you can see combination lines in general sense do a little bit more than what you can see. So last time around, we did about 20Ks with artifacts that I thought were best. So the first it was 20K and then like 90.5, 90.5. But let's see if we go in with these artifacts that are recommended over here. And let's see how much they would do. So that would be this one, which has a little bit more of, well, in here and there. We have to keep in mind that the crit damage more and the crit damage less are not really calculated in this one. There's no option in swap to say like, okay, I also want to calculate in crit damage more and crit damage less. It just simply doesn't. So with that in mind, you have to just remember that like, okay, if it shows something else that you might be like, hey, maybe I still think that the crit damage more, the crit damage less will be higher value. Especially on the unit, if you always hit just a one hit, let's say a Covenant or let's say an Ian or Sonya or any of those kind of units, then crit damage more is as good as a crit damage skill 2 or skill 3 or whatever skill you're using. So let's see how much damage this will do. Will it actually do more? I would be surprised. No, it actually does do less. You do see for the later 2 hits, it does actually do about the same-ish. So this is also the damage fluctuation out there. It is actually about the same-ish damage. The only one that is different for the other one is the first hit. And then also after that first hit, it is also the crit damage more. So that was actually showing where it was doing a little bit more damage. So in the end, this kind of did show like the right amount of damage. I think like the damage fluctuation is probably around the numbers that we have just seen. So yeah, about like 19.6. So this actually does do a little bit more damage for card 2 and card 3 than the ones that I actually thought were doing the most amount of damage. So it is still a little bit min-maxing. It would be nice in swap if we could actually say like, okay, calculate crit damage max as, or let's say like the enemy is max HP and therefore we calculate crit damage max as the full potential. Would be pretty nice as well. So then you can pretty much do this for any unit. Like let's say you're using a Covenant or let's say you're using a Sonya. Well, Sonya is a little bit more tricky because you have the speed gap. Same for Siri, you have the speed gap. But then for artifacts, it's still kind of the same thing. You're trying to add as much crit damage or attack to actually add in extra damage to that unit. Also a thing, let's say you want to calculate additional damage artifacts. So let's say you have a Juno and you want to calculate how much additional damage artifact would be the highest additional damage artifact for my unit. So let's say we want to calculate it on my Juno. My Juno, once again, we lock in the runes that we're not checking out the runes. We don't really care what main stat it is. Let's say the example that we don't care about that. We would have to say that we are doing this skill. If we put it on crit, you're actually going to see what happens. So it is a crit, it is this, and most of the time we do have speed buff on this unit as well. So let's hit apply, and let's actually see what it would show up. Oh wait, we don't put ignore defense. That is wrong. Only the part itself is ignore defense. So what is interesting, what you see over here is that it's also already taking in crit damage itself. So it is going to go for a right side artifact that has crit damage in there. But what you also see is that it's only taking attack bases because attack base is going to add in 200 attack on my Juno and therefore do more damage itself. So that is something that you have to keep in mind. Like, okay, you can't really calculate excluding like the base stat on it or anything like that. But you could kind of like back and forth try it to see like, okay, what is it on HP? So these are like 2.8s plus what we would like to do is we kind of want to ignore if there's a crit damage line in there. And what you can do that way is just make it a normal hit. If you make it a normal hit, it's going to be lower. It's not going to be exactly what you would actually be hitting, but at least it's not taking in like crit damage if it's there, or you're just going to ignore the crit damage by yourself. That's also an option if you want to see the actual number. So let's put it to crit. And then in this case, we can see that even if we do double HP, that we still pretty much do near similar damage as we had on the previous one. It's about 100, no, it's about 50 less damage. So we can see that this gives me a lot more tankiness, and it does nearly do the same amount of damage as I would have had like attack artifacts in there, just simply because these artifacts are better for the speed scaling itself. You could also be putting in like these numbers itself, or just like put multiple in there, because yep, there is one with defense that I do know, like the right side with defense is gonna do more. You can also play around with like, okay, maybe I don't always have speed buff, so let's remove the speed buff and then check the additional damage artifacts. Then what would be the highest then? Then it goes for a completely different one, which is like a combination line of all kinds of lines. So that is just something you can kind of play around with, like, okay, what would be fitting most on my units? Also, what would be the most interesting base stat on that unit? So you kind of have to toy around with like, okay, do I lock it in on a certain base stat or not? To check if you want to get the good element in there, because in most cases for Juno you don't gonna want to go base attack. Base defense is okay, base HP is mainly what you want to go for. So yeah, those are a few tips and tricks to get in extra damage on your artifacts. Do keep in mind that this is probably the best line for a lot of the units to get extra damage in, which is the attack increasing artifact, but in most cases it's a combination line. Combination line is key. What you could do, for example, is just count like how many rolls are there like in total, and then just kind of sum them together. These two are pretty much like on equal ground. This one is worth a little bit less, so you just add those two together, and then for this one you add like 0.8 of every roll for itself or something like that. You can kind of do the math on it, but in most cases, combination line is where you get most damage on your artifacts for. So guys, hope you enjoyed this video, learned a thing or two, and hope to see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you would like to see more guides, join the Discord and check out the content tab, which has the dungeon guide archive and the video guide archive, which contains all of the guides that you need. Hope to see you there.